The case that was inspired by the Scream movie.
There should be no law against killing people. I know it's a wrong thing, but hell, you restrict somebody from it, they're gonna want it more.
We found our victim, and sad as it may be, she's our friend. But you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Our first victim is going to be Cassie's daughter. She's going to be alone in a big, dark house out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get? I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke.
I'm shaking.
I stabbed her in the throat, and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie. Oh, fuck. That felt like fucking real.
You ever heard of the Villisca Axe murders? There was this serial killer that came in, and somehow this guy was able to come into the house, kill 2 parents and 6 kids, all in one house with an axe.
Tiny house.
Without getting caught at all. And to this day, it's an unsolved murder. One of the few times we actually had to leave. So halfway, like after doing a little tour with the tour guide, he was telling us all these stories. Our buddy was like feeling like he's gonna throw up, and it was just like really odd. Like that doesn't happen every time.
The most gruesome part about it is the killer used the blunt side of the axe, so you can still, because we went there to investigate, you can still see like the axe markings in the ceiling when he was going back to go down. On the top floor there was like the parents' room, but then right like 5 steps down a wooden creaky hallway was the children's room where there was 4 of them, and then there was 2 more of like their daughter's friends that they were hanging out with that were downstairs that got murdered as well.
So a lot of people have been feeling like the timeline is just a little messed up in their head, like when learning that Ludacris and Charlie Chaplin were alive at the same time. So here's a few more that have been bending my brain. And before we dive in, if you love horrors, hauntings, or mysteries, you'll love the podcast. So a lot of people don't know that by the time the colonists got to Plymouth Rock, there was already a hotel and restaurant fully functioning in Santa Fe. They did not discover a single thing. Clint Eastwood overlapped with both Marie Curie and Thomas Edison, and if he wanted to, which I'm sure he did, Genghis Khan could have invaded Oxford University. This tortoise named Harriet met both Steve Irwin and Charles Darwin, and those 2 events happened over 100 years apart from each other. We're actually closer to Keanu Reeves' 80th birthday than we are to the release of the original Matrix. Tobey Maguire in No Way Home was the same age as Willem Dafoe in the first Spider-Man. And finally, but my favorite, the last survivor of the Titanic could have watched Twilight.
Después de que mi esposo me asesinó, puso mis restos en la coladera para que nadie se diera cuenta. Soy Ingrid Escamilla y esta es mi historia. El día de los hechos, un 9 de febrero de 2020, mi esposo, Eric Francisco de 46 años, me asesinó mientras estaba alcoholizado. Perdí la vida tras una discusión fuerte con mi esposo. Me mutiló y luego sacó mis órganos para desechar el cuerpo. Eric le dijo a la policía que acabó conmigo porque lo hizo en forma de defensa. Pero la verdad es que yo vivía con un monstruo. Él nunca cambió. Mi caso fue uno de los feminicidios más crueles. El monstruo con el que vivía fue condenado a 70 años de prisión.
¿Por el cual estás lleno de sangre?
Por la herida en la cabeza.
¿Te sangraste la cabeza? ¿Con qué?
Por la discusión con mi esposa anoche.
¿Discutiste con tu esposa anoche? ¿Por qué motivo?
Porque se enojó de que andaba yo tomando.
Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? Well, this sketch was actually pulled from someone's subconscious during hypnotherapy, so let's find out. In 1960, 4 teens were camping in Finland, and the last thing that this guy remembers was falling asleep. When he woke up, he was in the hospital and he learned that he and his friends were attacked through the tent and that none of his friends had survived. The only thing was that teen, Nils Gustafsson, didn't remember a thing after falling asleep that night. And honestly, that caused a lot of people to think he was responsible for his friends' deaths. So Nils goes to hypnotherapy to see if he can recall anything from that night, and during hypnosis, he starts remembering a face. This is what he described to the hypnotherapist as the person who attacked him and his friends that night. And while this is happening, this man gets admitted to the hospital. He has splotches of red all over his clothes, and the nurses said it looked like he had been running through the woods. And I'm sure you probably see it, but this caused him to be the lead suspect. I cover the whole story this week on the podcast, which has so many twists and turns, including what this guy has to do with the story, so make sure you check it out.
I am the only unsolved airplane hijacking case in the United States. I am D.B. Cooper. It was November 1971, and I was sitting on a Northwest Orient Airlines flight ready to commit one of the biggest heists in American history. I posed as a regular passenger, but I had a plan. I handed a note to a pretty flight attendant, and she returned to thinking I was giving her my phone number. Then I said, "Miss, you better take a look at that note. I have a bomb. I wanted $200,000 in exchange for the passengers' lives." The passengers were panicked, but I assured them that I only wanted the money and nobody would get hurt. The pilot landed at an airport so I could collect the money in exchange for the passengers. Once I had the money, I ordered the pilot to fly to Mexico, but I never intended to go to Mexico. Instead, I asked the pilot to fly at an altitude of 10,000 feet, open the plane's rear door and parachuted out with a bag full of cash. I fell for over 2 minutes before landing in the Oregon mountains. Despite a massive manhunt by the FBI, I was never found. Part of the money was discovered years later by a child playing in the area. The case made headlines at the time, and it even inspired movies and books. But the identity of D.B. Cooper remains a mystery to this day. Many people have speculated about my identity. Some think I am dead, others believe I am still alive. But one thing is certain, I accomplished something incredible that has remained in history forever. Who knows? Maybe we'll cross paths one day. See you soon for more stories.
My helicopter met a tragic end in dense fog, leading to my demise and that of 8 others, including my beloved daughter Diana. I was known as Kobe Bryant, a name synonymous with basketball greatness. Let me share my tale. The fateful day was January 26, 2020, and we were en route to a basketball tournament where I was to coach Gianna's team. I often traveled by helicopter to maximize time and be there for my family, particularly during the NBA season. My basketball journey began at the tender age of 3, inspired by my father. I spent my formative years in Italy, learning multiple languages. I made a bold leap into the NBA at 17, bypassing college. My 20-year career with the Lakers was decorated with 5 championships, 2 Olympic gold medals, and I became the 4th all-time leading scorer. I also penned a book and created an animated short about my basketball passion, earning me an Oscar. Known as the Black Mamba, I liken myself to a swift and fierce snake. My goal was to be the best player I could be, and fear was not in my vocabulary. I was a leader, a mentor, and a beacon of inspiration to many. I was a devoted father and a loyal husband, with 4 daughters. Diana, like me, had a deep love for basketball. I aimed to pass on my legacy to her and support her dreams. We shared a special bond. My life was not without challenges. I faced severe injuries that impacted my health. I retired in 2016, scoring a remarkable 60 points in my final game. My sudden death sent shockwaves around the globe. Tributes flooded in, honoring my legendary career and influence. My wife Vanessa delivered a heartfelt speech at a ceremony in our memory. My life story is one of a man who pursued his passion relentlessly, striving for excellence, and leaving an unforgettable legacy in his field. It's also the story of a man whose love for his family was paramount, and who tragically lost his life while trying to share a cherished moment with his daughter. The lesson I'd like to impart is this: never take life for granted, as it can end abruptly. Cherish every moment with your loved ones, do what brings you joy. Chase your dreams with unwavering determination and bravery. Be thankful for those in your life and those who stand by you.
My name is Malia Shurik, and I was in the Aurora Theater mass shooting. My sister stutters, and she goes to this conference every year, and this year it was in Colorado. Coincidentally, we decided to go to the midnight showing of The Dark Knight. There was a big group of us, so it was about 10 of us, just us without our parents. So that was 7 years ago, so I was 20. The theater was very full. There was probably 3 or 4 different showings of the movie. We were all together and it was like, this movie, you know, midnight showing. It's really popular and there's gonna be a lot of people and it's a fun outing. I guess about 10 minutes into it, there's like a sequence in the movie where there's a lot of, you know, gunfire and kind of loud noises. The door right by us opened, and all of a sudden there was all this popping and smoke. He had thrown in a smoke bomb. I think at the time, most people in the theater thought it was part of the showing. I sort of thought that too, because it was a midnight showing and like, oh, maybe this is an immersive experience. We were all in the aisle, so we were pretty close to it. And I remember thinking, nobody else in this theater is really reacting. Nobody else thinks this is weird. And then he went into the theater next door to us and opened fire. And at that point, bullets came through the wall from the theater next door into our theater. And again, people weren't really reacting because you don't think shooting. I mean, I guess more recently you do because it's become more commonplace. But in 2012, we didn't really think shooting. The friend who was sitting behind us got shot in the arm and started, you know, bleeding. Honestly, that's probably what saved us, because even if we didn't really know what was going on, at that point it was time to get out. Even as we were getting up to get out of this theater that was being shot up, nobody else was really getting up around us. I remember being kind of embarrassed, like, sorry, we're, you know, disrupting your movie, you know, as we all get up to leave because our friend is bleeding. He'd been shot through the arm and was covered in blood. And even when we got out into the lobby, there weren't people there yet.
Oscar Mueller hears a knock at his door. He opens it to find one of his neighbors telling Oscar not to use the bathroom on the first floor. Oscar asks why, and the neighbor calmly explains it's blocked up with guts. Naturally, this piques his curiosity, so he walks upstairs, opens a bathroom stall, looks inside the toilet, and sees crimson-colored water and the remains of what appears to be an animal. He calls a local plumber who inspects the bathroom thoroughly, but he makes a different conclusion. These are definitely not the remains of an animal, but rather a child. Joachim Kroll is born April 17th, 1933 in Poland during World War II. He's the youngest of 8 kids, and his family, like many other families at this time, are suffering from extreme poverty. Joaquin's father is taken as a prisoner of war by the Russian army, leaving him and his 7 siblings with a single mom. He's seen as the weak link of the family, both physically and mentally, with his IQ of 76, and he's also the only one in the family that can't read. This causes him to struggle immensely in school, where Joaquin's forced to repeat grades multiple times until eventually he decides that he's had enough. At age 15, Joaquin drops out of the 4th grade and begins working full-time with his mom on the family farm. It's there that he sees a pig being slaughtered for the first time, and this experience deeply changes him, but more on that later. Joaquin then begins his first romantic relationship with a girl, but she's very critical of him, so he sees it as a complete failure. He then starts obsessing over death, because you can't criticize someone when you're dead, and it becomes an integral part of his sex life. At around the same time, in 1955, Joaquin's mother passes away, and this tragic event, coupled with his morbid curiosity, sends Joaquin down a spiral of very concerning behaviors, and it starts with blow-up dolls. He has countless of them, scattered all throughout his apartment, and at first uses them how they're supposed to be used, but eventually he takes things even further. He already likes the fact that the dolls don't move or speak, but it's strangling them that really fulfills his dark, twisted desires. Just 3 weeks after his mother's death, Joaquin lures a teenage girl to a barn under the premise that he's giving her a nice gift. He then strangles the poor girl to death and subjects her body to unspeakable acts that become signature aspects of his future killings. Joaquin's next known murder takes place 5 years later in June 1959 in an almost identical fashion. However, this time he takes pieces of the young girl's body parts, wraps them up, and cooks them for dinner. These 2 killings spark a murder spree that spans over the course of 20 years and result in the deaths of 13 women ages 4 to 61. The murders all have similar details and consist of Joaquin luring women to a remote location, strangling them with his bare hands, and doing whatever he pleases with their bodies post-mortem. However, in the case of 13-year-old Petra Gies, he uses the girl's own scarf to take her life on Easter Sunday 1962. Also, just 4 years later, he drowns 5-year-old Ilona Hark by holding her head underwater in a nearby stream, simply because he wants to know what it feels like to drown someone. This all comes to an end though on July 3rd, 1976, when police receive a call from one of Joaquin's neighbors, Oscar Moeller, who tells them the waste pipe in his apartment is blocked up and he and the plumber have an idea of what's been blocking the pipe. When police arrive on scene, they too recognize that the remains inside the toilet are that of a young girl. Coincidentally, a local neighborhood girl has recently gone missing, so when police go to Joaquin's apartment to investigate, they're stunned to see the body of 4-year-old Marianne Ketter cut into pieces. Some are in the refrigerator, some are in the boiling pot that he's actively cooking, and many are in the waste pipe. Now, I want you to think back to the beginning of the story. Joaquin literally told his neighbor that there are guts in the pipe and proceeded to be cooking them at the same time. Just a reminder that this man is not the brightest, and it is shocking to me that it took police this long just to find him. Joaquin's arrested and immediately confesses to 13 other murders and 1 attempted killing over the past couple decades. And when asked why he's cutting off portions of his victims and eating them, he simply claims that he was doing it to save on his grocery bills. After being forced to demonstrate the killings through a series of haunting reconstruction pictures, Joaquin Kroll is charged with 8 murders and 1 attempted murder. In April 1982, he's sentenced to life in prison but dies just 9 years later of a heart attack.